Welcome to my channel Bookish English 2, friends. Have you ever heard of a man who walked through frozen death to save 28 souls? This is not just a story. This is a storm, a lesson, a miracle. If you think life is hard, wait till you hear this story. Don't miss a single moment, because each chapter brings you closer to the edge. Let's begin. Chapter 1. It all started with a dream that was bigger than fear. A dream that didn't care about danger. A dream that laughed in the face of death. In the year 1914, a man named Ernest Shackleton made a decision that would change the lives of 27 men forever. He wanted to walk across Antarctica. Yes, friends, to cross the coldest, loneliest, and most dangerous continent on Earth. On foot. No one had ever done this before. It was nearly impossible. But Shackleton believed that great things never come easy. And so, with his dream in his heart and determination in his eyes, he began the journey that the world would never forget. There were no mobile phones in those days. No GPS. No internet. No satellite to guide them. Only a compass, some maps, and pure courage. The plan was to take a ship called Endurance from the South Atlantic, enter the Weddell Sea, reach the coast of Antarctica, and then walk 2,900 kilometers to the other side, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea. That's almost the same distance as walking from London to Moscow. In freezing temperatures, with icy winds, across deadly snowstorms. But Shackleton believed that the strength of the mind was more powerful than any storm, and he wanted to prove it. Shackleton handpicked his crew, 27 brave men, sailors, carpenters, scientists, a doctor, a cook, even a photographer. All of them believed in one thing, their leader. Shackleton had already been to Antarctica twice. He had failed before, but he never gave up. He knew this would be the most dangerous trip of his life. But he was ready, and his men were ready to follow him anywhere, even to the end of the world. In August 1914, just days after World War I began in Europe, the Endurance sailed from Britain. The world was at war, but Shackleton's war was with nature. He was not looking for fame or medals. He was chasing a goal that no one dared to chase. His ship crossed the Atlantic and reached a remote island in the south called South Georgia. This was the last stop before Antarctica. A whaling station stood there. Men who hunted whales told Shackleton, "Don't go. The ice this year is worse than we've ever seen. You might not come back." But Shackleton didn't turn back. He looked at the sky, looked at his ship, and simply said, "We go forward." On December 5, 1914, Endurance left the safety of land behind. The crew waved goodbye to the last human voices they would hear for nearly 2 years. The ship moved into open water, then slowly into the dangerous Weddell Sea. This part of the ocean is like a trap. It is surrounded by Antarctica on 3 sides, so the ice that breaks doesn't float away. It stays, grows, and gets thicker. It's like a living wall of ice. And soon, they were inside it. At first, the ice was scattered. They moved forward carefully. Shackleton kept smiling, encouraging the men. "We're doing fine," he would say. But deep down, he was worried. Every hour, the ice became heavier, thicker, closer. It was like the sea was slowly closing its jaws. And then, on January 18, 1915, something terrible happened. The ship was trapped, completely frozen in the ice. It could not move. The engines were useless. The crew stood on deck and stared out. White ice stretched as far as the eye could see. No land, no water, no escape. For the next few days, they tried everything. They hoped the ice would move and open a path. But it didn't. Some men even saw a small crack in the ice about 50 meters away, their only hope to break free. They drove the engines full speed for 3 hours, trying to reach that opening. But the ship didn't move even 1 inch. The men got out with saws and axes, trying to cut through the ice. But it was too thick. They were stuck. And it wasn't just the ship that was stuck. The ice they were trapped in was floating. It began to drift away from land. Their planned landing point, Vosel Bay, was now behind them. But between them and the bay was open water. Too far to walk. And the ship couldn't move. Every passing day, they were drifting deeper into nowhere. And winter was coming. In Antarctica, winter means 24 hours of darkness. No sunlight. Just black sky, snowstorms, and freezing winds that can kill in minutes. Still, Shackleton didn't panic. He told his men, "We'll winter here on this ship. We're strong. We can do this." And so, they prepared to spend the coldest months of their lives on a wooden ship stuck in ice. They made routines. They played games. They sang songs. They even had a photographer, Frank Hurley, who kept taking pictures. Shackleton knew one thing. If their minds broke, they would all die. So he kept their spirits high, even when he himself was worried sick. But the ice had its own plan. The pressure kept growing. It squeezed the ship like a giant hand. On September 30th, 1915, cracks appeared in the ship's sides. The crew heard the wood groan. They hadn't seen land in months. Hadn't seen another human being. They were cold, hungry, lost. But still they hoped. Still they waited. And then, the real disaster struck. Chapter 2. The ice was now not just their prison. It was becoming their enemy. The pressure around the ship increased every day. The crew could feel it. The wood would make strange, deep sounds, as if the ship itself was groaning in pain. It was like standing inside a living creature that was being crushed slowly. On October 24th, 1915, at exactly 6:45 p.m., a sound like thunder echoed across the ice. A huge slab of ice had slammed into the back of the ship. The stern cracked. Water began to flood in. Shackleton ran out on the deck. He saw the crew working fast, trying to pump the water out. Their faces were calm, but their eyes were full of fear. They were now in a race against time. The men worked for 3 days, nonstop. The temperature was minus 8.5 degrees Celsius. Their hands were frozen, their feet numb. But no one stopped. They knew that if the water filled the ship, it would sink and take their only shelter with it. Some men tried to dig through the ice to release the pressure. But it was no use. The ice was too strong. The water kept coming in. The ship was dying slowly, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Finally, Shackleton looked at his men and gave the hardest order of his life: abandon ship. The men packed their most important belongings. Not gold, not clothes, but what could help them live. A few tools, some food, medical kits, and 3 small lifeboats. One of the sailors, Tom McLeod, looked around and whispered, "None of us will ever get home." But Shackleton replied, "Yes, we will. Every one of us." He said it not because he was sure, but because his men needed to believe. On October 27th, 1915, a loud explosion shook the ice. Shackleton turned back and saw something that broke his heart. The back of the Endurance rose 20 feet into the air. It looked like a wooden whale about to die. The rudder broke off. The ship split open, the front filled with water. The ice was eating the ship alive. Slowly, the sea began to swallow the dream. The dream to walk across Antarctica was gone. But something more important remained: 28 lives. And Shackleton knew that now. The mission was not about success. It was about survival. The crew had no radio, no way to contact the outside world. No one knew where they were. No one was coming to save them. They were alone, lost in a frozen ocean on a sheet of drifting ice. The ice sheet was floating farther away from land every day. There was no guarantee it would hold. If it cracked beneath them, they would fall into the freezing sea. They needed to move. They needed to find solid ground. But where? And how? Shackleton gathered his team. He told them the truth. They had only 1 month's food left. That meant biscuits, tinned meat, and some supplies from the ship. There was not enough shelter. Many men slept directly on the ice, huddled close to share body heat. Some nights, the temperature dropped so low that their breath froze on their faces. They could barely sleep. And yet, no one gave up. No one said, "I can't." Because when you have a strong leader who believes in you, even the ice cannot break your heart. Shackleton made a decision. There was an island far to the north, Pallet Island, about 550 kilometers away. Years ago, when a Swedish ship had gotten stuck in Antarctica, some emergency supplies were left on that island. Shackleton himself had helped provide those supplies. Now, 12 years later, he needed them. He planned to reach Pallet Island with the lifeboats. But the journey would be long and dangerous. They had to carry the boats across the ice, boats that weighed more than a ton each. To do this, Shackleton gave a strict rule. Each person could carry only 2 pounds of personal items. Some men had letters from home. Some had books. Some had souvenirs. Shackleton himself placed gold coins and a Bible in the snow to show that nothing was more valuable than life. The photographer, Frank Hurley, had over 400 photo negatives. He picked only 150 to carry. Those photos, saved at great cost, would later show the world this historic struggle. The crew started pulling the boats. But the ice was soft. After 3 hours of work, they had moved just 1 mile. They were exhausted. Shackleton realized it would not work. So, they built a new camp. This camp was named Ocean Camp. Here, they waited for the ice to carry them closer to land. They hunted seals and penguins for food. They shared jokes. Shackleton made sure everyone had work. No one was allowed to feel useless. Because depression is dangerous in such times. They must stay strong, not only in body, but in mind. Weeks passed. On November 21st, 1915, the crew saw something terrible. Endurance, their ship, which still stood in the ice far behind, finally broke apart and vanished under the sea. They were only a few kilometers away and watched it happen. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. It felt like watching a friend die. For months, they had looked back at the ship and felt connected to home. But now, that connection was gone. Only the ice remained. Only the cold wind. And their courage. Now they had nothing. No ship. No map. No guarantee that the ice wouldn't break. But they had something stronger: belief. And that belief was not just in Shackleton. It was in each other. Chapter 3. After the ship was gone, the men stood in silence. They watched the last piece of the Endurance disappear under the ice. Some had tears in their eyes. That ship had been their home for more than a year. It had protected them from cold, storms, and fear. Now, it was gone forever. Shackleton did not say much. He stood quietly for a moment, then turned to his men and said, "Ship and stores gone. Now we go home." Those words were simple, but behind them was a mountain of determination. The men now lived on a floating sheet of ice in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. There were no trees, no animals except a few seals and penguins. Just ice. Ice in every direction. Their new home was not land. It was a moving, melting platform, and they had no idea where it was going. It was like sitting on a slow boat with no engine and no sail. Only the wind and sea decided where they would go. But Shackleton remained calm. He still believed that they would survive. Somehow, the ice they were camped on was drifting east. Shackleton had wanted it to go north, toward Pallet Island. But the wind and water were stronger than their wishes. They couldn't fight it. So they stayed. They hunted seals and cooked them. They drank water by melting ice with their body heat. Every day was the same. Cold, hunger, and waiting. Weeks passed. The ice began to crack again. They had to move. Shackleton gave the order to break camp. They started walking again, pulling the heavy boats across the snow. They hoped to find stronger ice, or maybe land. But very soon, they faced thin ice and water. They couldn't go forward. They couldn't go back. Once again, they were trapped. So they built another camp. They named this place Patience Camp, because patience was now their greatest tool. At Patience Camp, the food supply became even worse. Shackleton began rationing it more strictly. 1 biscuit per day, some dried milk, a little bit of cocoa, sometimes a spoon of meat paste from a can. That was all. But even then, he smiled at the men and said, "We have enough. Just a little longer." He lied to give them hope. He lied to protect their spirits. Because he knew something that every great leader knows. When the mind gives up, the body follows. But even this small amount of food was not enough. The men were starving. So they began to hunt more. They killed seals and penguins. They used every part of the animal, meat, fat, blood. Nothing was wasted. One day, they found a sea leopard, a dangerous creature, but they killed it and got nearly 1,000 pounds of meat. It was a miracle. It gave them strength. It gave them more days to live. Still, it was not enough. The ice was shrinking. Their camp was now on a small piece of ice, about the size of a football field, and it was getting smaller. If it cracked, they would all fall into the freezing sea. They needed to leave. They had to use the boats. Shackleton looked at the map. The nearest real land was Elephant Island, 160 kilometers away. It was their only hope. It was the last island before the deadly Drake Passage. Shackleton gave the order. The men loaded the 3 boats and got ready to sail. The sea was full of icebergs. The waves were rough. The cold cut through their skin like knives. But there was no other option. Staying on the ice meant death. They had to try. They pushed the boats into the sea, and the journey began. It was the most dangerous part yet. They had no engine, just oars, no sails, only hands and hope. They rowed for hours. Their hands froze. Their lips cracked. Water splashed over them. It felt like needles on the skin. Some men started vomiting. Others passed out from cold. But Shackleton kept going. He called out, "Keep rowing, boys. Don't stop now." They passed through blocks of ice and waves as high as houses. Sometimes they had to get out and push the boats over the ice. Sometimes they had to wait for hours in one spot. Their clothes were wet. Their fingers were blue. But still, they did not stop. After 4 days, they saw something in the distance. A dark shape. A mountain. It was real. It was land. It was Elephant Island. On April 15, 1916, after 497 days lost at sea and on ice, they stepped on solid ground. The moment their feet touched the land, some cried, some laughed, Some fell to their knees. They were safe, for now. Shackleton looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." But deep inside, he knew the journey was not over. This island was uninhabited. No people. No rescue supplies. No radio. They were still alone. Now they had to ask the hardest question of all. How do we get home from here? Chapter 4. Elephant Island. A dark, rocky land covered in snow and ice. No trees. No animals to hunt. No humans. No hope of being discovered by any passing ship, because no ships passed this way. For the men of Shackleton's crew, it felt like reaching heaven and hell at the same time. They had land under their feet, yes, but they were still not safe. This island was not home. It was just another cold prison. Only this time, they were not floating. The men were exhausted. Their hands were frozen. Their bodies weak. One of the youngest crew members, Percy Blackborough, could barely stand. He had hidden himself as a stowaway months ago, secretly joining the expedition without permission. Shackleton had allowed him to stay. But now, after all they had been through, his legs were giving up. The cold had taken away his strength. And he wasn't the only one. The long journey had drained everyone. Still, Shackleton didn't rest. His mind was racing. He looked at the map again. He knew there were only 3 places they could possibly reach. Cape Horn in South America, about 800 kilometers away. Falkland Islands, 880 kilometers. Or the whaling station at South Georgia Island, 1,300 kilometers across the most dangerous sea on Earth. The Drake Passage, a place where waves reached 12 meters high, where more than 20,000 sailors had lost their lives over the years. A graveyard of ships. But that whaling station was the only place with people. And Shackleton knew, if he didn't bring help, his men would die. He made a decision. He would take one of the boats, the strongest one, the James Caird, and sail to South Georgia with 5 others. A journey of 1,300 kilometers. In a 22-foot wooden boat. Across the most violent waters in the world. In winter, it sounded like suicide. But for Shackleton, there was no other way. He picked 5 men. Captain Frank Worsley, the navigator, Tom Crean, his loyal friend, John Vincent, Timothy McCarthy, and Harry McNish, the carpenter. These were the strongest and most trusted. Before leaving, Shackleton gave orders to Frank Wild, his second in command. Wild would lead the men left behind. Shackleton looked at him and said, "I will come back. Hold on. Keep them alive." He shook hands with every man. They watched him go, not knowing if they would ever see him again. On April 24, 1916, the small boat set sail. The waves rose high. The boat rose and fell like a toy in a child's bath. Salt water soaked their clothes. The cold air bit into their skin. Inside the boat, there was no room to stand. They took turns rowing for 4 hours, then resting for 4 hours, curled up like animals, wet and shaking. They couldn't light a fire. They couldn't dry their clothes. They couldn't sleep properly. For days, they vomited, bled, and froze, but they kept going. One day, a giant storm hit them. The boat was tossed like a leaf. One wave almost flipped them. Shackleton thought the boat would break. He gritted his teeth, held the ropes tight, and shouted above the storm, "Hold fast!" He saw a bird flying in circles over their boat. In that moment, all his anger, pain, and frustration burst out. He screamed at the bird, not because he hated it, but because he was afraid. Even the strongest man sometimes cracks. But Shackleton didn't let it show for long. He wiped his face and kept rowing. For 14 long days, they sailed through hell. The sun appeared for only a few hours. Those few hours were their only chance to use the sextant, a simple tool to know direction. Without it, they would be lost. They managed to check their direction just 4 times in 2 weeks. And still, they were sailing blind most of the time. Finally, one morning, they saw land. South Georgia Island. Shackleton's eyes filled with tears. But the sea was not done testing them. Another storm rose. Waves crashed against the boat. For 24 more hours, they were pushed away. Their strength was almost gone. Then, the sky cleared. The wind calmed. And the boat moved closer. After fighting death for 3 weeks, they landed on the southern shore of South Georgia Island. They had made it. But again, they were on the wrong side. The whaling station was on the north coast, 29 miles away. But between them and the station were mountains so high, so dangerous, that no man had ever crossed them. There were no paths, no maps, just snow, ice, cliffs, and danger. Shackleton had to choose: get back in the broken boat and sail 130 miles around the island, or walk through the unknown mountains with no gear. The boat was too damaged, so he chose the harder path. He would walk. They built a small shelter and rested for 9 days. They ate penguins and seals, regained a little strength. Then, on May 19th, at 3 in the morning, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean tied themselves together with rope and started walking into the darkness. No sleeping bags, no tents, just courage, just determination, and a will that refused to die. They climbed mountain after mountain. The snow reached their knees. Sometimes they thought they saw a way forward, only to find a frozen sea or a wall of rock. They had to turn back, again and again. For 36 hours, they didn't sleep. They didn't stop. They cut stairs into the ice with their axes. They slid down cliffs using ropes. They prayed they wouldn't fall. They had only one chance. If they failed, no one would ever know where they died. Then, at sunrise, they saw smoke in the sky. It was coming from the whaling station. Shackleton's heart beat fast. He ran forward, falling, rising, falling again. He reached the station, dirty, frozen, unrecognizable. The men there stared in shock. "Who are you?" someone asked. Shackleton said only 4 words. "My name is Shackleton." Silence fell. And then, the tears came. He was alive. But his work was not over, because 22 men were still waiting on Elephant Island. Chapter 5. When Shackleton finally reached the whaling station on South Georgia Island, the people there could not believe their eyes. The man standing in front of them looked like a ghost. His clothes were torn. His beard was wild. His face was black from sun and cold. His voice was weak, but his eyes, they were still full of fire. One man whispered, "It's him. It's Shackleton." They thought he had died 2 years ago. But here he was, alive, and with only one request: "Help me save my men." The whaling station gave Shackleton food, dry clothes, and a warm place to sleep. He took a hot bath, shaved his beard, and for the first time in many months, lay down on a real bed. But his heart did not rest. He was thinking about the 22 men still waiting on Elephant Island. It had been over a month since he left them. He didn't know if they were alive. But in his mind, he saw their faces. He remembered their voices. And he had promised he would return. The next morning, Shackleton sent a boat around the island to pick up the 3 other men who were still on the south side of South Georgia. They had stayed behind to keep the shelter safe. When they saw the boat coming, they shouted and cried. They had survived, and now they were going home. It was a small victory, but the real test was still ahead. Shackleton now needed a ship strong enough to break through the Antarctic ice and reach Elephant Island. But South Georgia was a small place. It didn't have such a ship. So he asked the British government. They said they would help, but it would take time. Shackleton didn't want to wait. Every day he waited could be the day his men gave up. Every hour could be the difference between life and death. So he tried on his own. He got a ship and set sail toward Elephant Island. But just like before, the ice was thick. The ship couldn't pass. He turned back. He tried again with another ship. The same thing happened. The sea blocked him. He tried a third time, but the ice crushed their hopes again. Shackleton was not the kind of man who gave up, but now he was worried. He had tried 3 times and failed. The clock was ticking. Finally, the British government gave him a ship called Discovery, but it would take more weeks to prepare. Shackleton could not wait anymore. He begged the Chilean government for help. They gave him a small ship called Yelcho. It was not strong. It was not built for ice. But it was his only hope. Shackleton took the risk. On August 25, 1916, the Yelcho set sail for Elephant Island. Back on the island, the men were still alive. But they were losing strength. Frank Wild, the second in command, had done what Shackleton asked. Every morning, he would wake up and say to the men, "Pack your bags, boys. The boss may come today." He said it again and again, even when the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The men built a shelter using 2 overturned boats and pieces of sailcloth. They hunted seals and penguins. But the cold was brutal. The wind never stopped. Their lips cracked. Their hands shook. And still, they waited. One man, Blackborough, had a serious infection in his foot. His toes turned black. There was no doctor, no medicine. The other men had no choice. They had to cut off his toes to save his life. They did it with simple tools. No painkillers, just courage. Another man had a heart attack, but somehow he survived. The truth was, no one on that island knew if Shackleton was even alive. Maybe he had died in the sea. Maybe he had been lost in the mountains. But Frank Wild never stopped believing. And because of him, the others kept believing too. Then, on August 30th, 1916, something unbelievable happened. A man outside the camp shouted, "There's a ship!" Everyone jumped to their feet. Was it real? Or were their minds playing tricks? They ran to the shore. And yes, there it was. A real ship, moving closer. And standing on that ship was Shackleton. They could not believe it. After 128 days alone on Elephant Island, after 2 years lost at sea, the boss had returned. Shackleton was back, just like he promised. The men cried. They shouted. They waved. The ship came close. Shackleton looked through his binoculars. He counted every man. All 22 were alive. When he stepped onto the island, no one said anything for a moment. Then one of the men simply said, "We knew you'd come." That moment was filled with silence and strength, because now the impossible had happened. Shackleton had saved every single one of his men. Not one was lost. After 2 years of ice, sea, storms, hunger, and fear, they were all going home. As they boarded the ship, the men looked back one last time. The place that nearly became their grave had become their greatest lesson. Never give up, no matter how strong the storm, no matter how far the shore. Chapter 6. The men were now finally aboard the rescue ship Yelcho. The boat was small, cold, and crowded, but to them, It felt like the safest place on Earth. It was the first time in 2 years they had been inside a real ship. For the first time in 600 days, they were leaving Antarctica behind. There were no cheers, no loud celebration, just quiet smiles, soft tears, and deep, deep relief. Shackleton stood on deck, looking at the faces of his crew one by one. All 27 were there. Not one had been lost. And that was his greatest success. But even now, Shackleton couldn't fully relax. The sea was still rough. Icebergs floated in the distance. The winds were strong. The Yelcho was not made for Antarctic waters. If something went wrong now, after coming so far, the dream of rescue could still turn into another disaster. So Shackleton kept watch. He barely slept. He stood on the bridge with the captain, scanning the horizon, checking the ice. His body was tired, but his mind was still sharp. Until they reached land, he would not stop. Behind him, the crew slept for the first time in peace. Some of them hadn't smiled in weeks. Now, their faces were soft again. Blackborough, the young stowaway whose foot had been amputated, lay in a corner, wrapped in warm blankets. He couldn't walk, but he was alive. That was enough. Frank Wilde sat quietly, his eyes closed, holding his diary. Tom Crean whispered a small prayer. Worsley, the navigator, smiled for the first time in days. These men had suffered more than most people could ever imagine, and yet they had survived. On September 3, 1916, the Yelcho reached Punta Arenas, a small port in southern Chile. News of the rescue had already spread. People were waiting at the docks. They had heard that Shackleton had returned, and that he had brought all his men back. As the crew stepped off the ship, people clapped. Some cried. Many shook their hands. Shackleton didn't speak much. He was proud, but he didn't want fame. He just wanted to keep his promise. Back in England, World War I was still raging. Cities were under attack. Soldiers were dying every day. When the newspapers reported Shackleton's story, it gave people hope. It reminded them that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could still shine. One headline read, "All men saved. Shackleton's miracle on ice." People across the world called him a hero. But Shackleton never claimed to be one. He once said, "I was only doing my duty." That was who he was, a leader who put his men before himself. The British government offered to give him awards, medals, honors. But Shackleton had something else in mind. He wanted to go back. Yes, even after everything, he wanted to return to Antarctica. His dream of crossing the continent was still alive. Many people could not understand it. Why go back? They asked. Why face that pain again? But Shackleton wasn't chasing pain. He was chasing purpose. He didn't want to die a hero. He wanted to live with meaning. In 1921, 5 years after saving his crew, Shackleton began planning another expedition to Antarctica. He called it the Shackleton-Rowett Expedition. This time, he wanted to explore uncharted islands and finish what he had started. But his body was no longer the same. Years of cold, stress, and exhaustion had taken their toll. He was not as strong as before, but his mind was still unbreakable. In December 1921, he sailed again for South Georgia Island. It was the place where he had made history, the place that had tested him and proved his strength. On January 5, 1922, just days after arriving, Shackleton suffered a heart attack. He passed away quietly in his cabin. He was only 47 years old. His wife later wrote, "He belongs to the South." And so, he was buried in South Georgia. the same island where he had made the impossible possible. His grave still stands there today. A simple stone, no loud words, just his name, and the place that became both his battlefield and his resting place. Visitors from around the world come to see it. Some bring flowers. Others just stand in silence, thinking about the man who never gave up. But Shackleton's story didn't end there. In 2022, 100 years after his death, scientists searching the sea near Antarctica made a shocking discovery. They had found the Endurance, his lost ship. It was sitting on the sea floor, 10,000 feet below the surface, frozen in time. And it looked almost perfect. The cold waters of the Weddell Sea had kept it safe, untouched for more than a century. The name, Endurance, was still visible on the side, like a message from the past, a reminder that courage never sinks. Shackleton's life teaches us something powerful. You don't need to win to be a hero. You don't need medals to be remembered. True greatness comes when you care more about others than yourself, when you lead with heart, when you keep your promises, and when you refuse to give up, no matter how hard the journey. He didn't cross Antarctica, but he crossed something greater, the limits of human fear, and he brought every man back alive. That, friends, is the mark of a real leader. Chapter 7. The world called Shackleton a hero. Newspapers across continents printed his story. Leaders, kings, and explorers praised him. But when people asked him how he saved all 27 of his men in such a deadly place, he simply smiled and said, "I put their lives before mine." That was Shackleton. He didn't brag. He didn't seek attention. But deep inside, he knew leadership is not about shouting. It's about listening, caring, and deciding when no one else can. That's what kept those men alive. Back on Elephant Island, those last 4 months had been the most difficult of all. After Shackleton left with 5 crew members in the boat, the 22 remaining men had only one thing to hold on to: faith. The island was brutal. Winds howled day and night. Temperatures dropped below freezing. There was no warmth, no sunlight, no sign of life. They had very little food. They had no shelter, except 2 overturned boats and some sails. It was like living inside a freezer with no escape. Yet, they waited. Frank Wild, the man Shackleton left in charge, became the heart of the camp. Every morning, no matter how cold it was, he stood up and told the same line: "Pack your things, boys. The boss may come today." And every evening, when no ship arrived, he didn't break down. He didn't show sadness. He simply looked at his men and said, "Tomorrow, then." It became a ritual, a small sentence that gave big hope. This routine saved them. It gave them something to believe in. In such places, when hope dies, people die. But Frank Wild kept the flame alive. They hunted penguins. They boiled bones. They ate seal meat raw when they had no fire. When the snow was too strong, they lay under wet blankets, trembling but not giving up. And even when some men lost feeling in their fingers and toes, even when lips cracked from thirst, they still waited. Because they believed in Shackleton. They believed he would return. But time was running out. Blackborough, the youngest crew member, was suffering from frostbite. His leg had turned black. There were no doctors, no clean tools. And yet, to save his life, they amputated his toes right there in the cold. No anesthesia, no comfort, only courage. Another man, Rickinson, had chest pain. Later, they found out he had suffered a heart attack. But he never gave up. He stayed strong because everyone else did. They survived 128 days this way, for long months of waiting on a forgotten rock in the middle of the Antarctic Sea. Then finally, on that life-changing day, August 30th, 1916, they saw a ship. At first, they thought it was a dream, a trick of the mind. But then the ship came closer. One man shouted, "It's the Yelcho." Another screamed, "The boss. It's the boss." Tears poured down their faces. For the first time in months, their pain melted into joy. Shackleton stood at the front of the ship, using binoculars to count heads. One by one, he whispered the names to himself: Wild, Hurley, McElroy, Blackborough, all present, all alive. His eyes filled with tears. He had kept his promise. When the Yelcho reached the island, there was no long speech. No big drama. Shackleton stepped ashore and asked only one question. "Are you all well?" Frank Wilde smiled, saluted, and said, "All safe, sir. All well." Those words hit Shackleton like a wave. Against all odds, they had made it. The men packed what little they had. They looked at the place that had nearly killed them and whispered goodbye. Some even touched the ground one last time. It had tested them, broken them, but also made them stronger. They left with no treasure, no medals, only memories of a miracle. As the ship sailed back to safety, they didn't sing or dance. They sat quietly, holding on to each other. Their bodies were thin, their skin pale, but their hearts were stronger than ever. They had survived not just cold and hunger, but the fear of being forgotten. And the truth is, friends, they were not forgotten. Their story became one of the greatest examples of survival in human history. Today, it is taught in leadership schools, military academies, and history books. Not because they won a war or reached the South Pole, but because they showed the world what humans can do when they refuse to give up. No radios, no rescue teams, no GPS. Just one leader, 27 believers, and a fire in the heart that said, "We will not die here." Chapter 8. The ship Yelcho slowly moved away from Elephant Island. The men stood at the back, watching the island grow smaller and smaller. It was hard to believe they were really leaving. That icy rock had been their world for 4 long months. A world of hunger, freezing winds, pain, and endless waiting. Now, after everything, they were finally going home. But it wasn't just a physical return. It was emotional. It was spiritual. They were not the same men anymore. They were survivors. Shackleton stood quietly, his hand gripping the rail. He didn't smile much. He didn't celebrate. He was thinking, remembering every risk, every sleepless night, every painful decision. He had walked across glaciers. He had sailed across storms. He had seen his ship break apart like matchsticks in ice. But the hardest thing he had done was keep 27 men alive when everything said they should die. And now he had done it. But it came at a price, a heavy one. Most of the men had lost weight. Their skin was darkened by frostbite and sunburn. Some had lost feeling in their fingers. Others walked with pain in their feet. But they were not bitter, not angry. They didn't complain. They knew they had been part of something greater, something unforgettable, something people would talk about for generations. A true test of human spirit. When they arrived in Chile, the people welcomed them with open arms. The crew was taken to a hospital. Doctors checked them. Nurses brought hot soup and blankets. Reporters asked questions. Everyone wanted to know how they had survived. But there was one thing everyone kept repeating. All of them are alive. No one died. It felt like a miracle. Because it was. Back in Britain, the country was deep in war. The newspapers printed the news with excitement. Shackleton returns, every man safe. But the joy didn't last long. Just days after the men reached safety, they were asked to join the army. The world was still at war. And now, even these brave survivors had to return to another kind of danger. Some of the crew joined the British Navy. Others were sent to the battlefields in Europe. Shackleton himself wanted to help, but the war was nearly over by the time he returned. Still, even though he didn't fight in the war, many people said his story gave the world something more powerful than weapons. It gave them hope. But even then, Shackleton wasn't satisfied. Deep in his heart, he still felt something was incomplete. He had never crossed Antarctica, his original dream. That dream still lived inside him. And so, in 1921, he began to plan one more expedition. He wanted to explore the Antarctic coastline. He wanted to go back to the place that had tried to kill him, not for revenge, but for purpose. He was older now, slower. The long years of cold and worry had taken a toll on his health. But he ignored it. He gathered a new crew, bought a new ship, and set out once again to the south. His wife didn't stop him. She knew he didn't belong in cities or offices. He belonged in the wild, in the cold, in the unknown. That's where his soul came alive. When the ship reached South Georgia Island, the same place where he had once found help, Shackleton didn't feel well. He had chest pain. He couldn't sleep. A doctor on board told him to rest. But he didn't listen. He was too excited, too close to his dream. On January 5, 1922, in the early morning, Shackleton died of a heart attack. He passed away quietly in his cabin, with the sea he loved surrounding him. He was 47 years old. When the crew told his wife, she gave a simple answer: he belongs to the South. And so, they buried him there, on South Georgia Island. Not in London, not in a grand place, but in the land of ice and wind, the place that had tested him and revealed his greatness. Today, Shackleton's grave is still there, a simple stone with his name. Travelers from all over the world come to see it. Some bring flowers. Some bring small flags. Others just stand silently, looking at the sea and imagining what he must have felt. What kind of man walks into a frozen land, loses everything, and still brings everyone home? But friends, the story doesn't end there. In 2022, a research team searching the deep waters of the Weddell Sea made an amazing discovery. They found the wreck of the Endurance, Shackleton's lost ship. It was sitting quietly, 10,000 feet under the sea, frozen in time. And it looked beautiful. The name Endurance was still written clearly on the wood. Not broken, not gone, just resting, as if waiting to be found. This was more than history. It was a message from the past that said, even after 106 years, strength does not sink. Courage does not rot. Endurance does not die. And that is what Shackleton's journey truly was. Not a journey through Antarctica, but a journey into the heart of what it means to be human. Chapter 9. The name of the ship was Endurance, and no name could have been more perfect. That ship did not just carry men across oceans. It carried hope. It carried courage. And even after it sank beneath the ice, it carried a story that would live on for more than 100 years. In 2022, when scientists found Endurance at the bottom of the sea, perfectly preserved, it was like finding a frozen piece of bravery. A ship lost in time, a symbol of everything Shackleton stood for. They sent cameras deep into the Weddell Sea, nearly 10,000 feet below the surface. There it was, still whole, still strong. The wooden beams had not collapsed. The name, Endurance, still shining on the bow. No sea creatures had eaten it. No rot had taken it. It had simply waited, just like the men once did on the ice. Quiet, brave, unbroken. This discovery shocked the world. People had searched for this ship for decades. But ice, cold, and darkness had hidden it well. And now, 106 years later, the ship came back. Not to sail again, but to remind us what it meant to endure, what it meant to lead, what it meant to never, ever give up. Back in Shackleton's time, there were no rescue helicopters, no satellites, no weather updates, no emergency calls, only a compass, a map, and belief. Today, it's hard to imagine surviving such a place without technology. But Shackleton didn't rely on machines. He relied on trust. Trust in his crew. Trust in his instinct. Trust in his own will. That's what made his story special. That's what turned it into one of the greatest survival stories in human history. It wasn't just the cold that tried to break them. It was time. It was fear. It was doubt. But they held on, together. Every man had moments of weakness. Some cried. Some prayed. Some nearly gave up. But when one man was falling, another picked him up. And when they all felt weak, Shackleton stood tall, so they didn't have to. He kept them moving, kept them laughing, kept their minds busy. He gave them small jobs every day, cleaning, cooking, reading weather, writing in journals. Not because those jobs mattered much, but because if your hands are working, your mind doesn't fall apart. He knew that keeping the body alive was only half the battle. The other half was keeping the heart alive. That's why he lied about food. That's why he smiled when he was scared. That's why he walked first when the ice cracked. Because real leaders eat last. Real leaders fear in silence. Real leaders make others believe, even when they don't believe themselves. And Shackleton did that every single day. Do you know what one of the men said many years later? He said, "If Shackleton had told us to march into the sea, we would have followed him." That's how strong his leadership was. It wasn't about rules. It was about trust. It was about heart. It was about looking into another man's eyes and saying, "I will not let you die here," and meaning it. After their return, most of the crew went back to normal life. Some joined the war. Some wrote books. Some disappeared into quiet homes. But all of them carried one thing with them, the unshakable belief that they had faced death and come out stronger. That they had been part of something no one else would ever understand. Not fully. And Shackleton? He never stopped dreaming. Even after all that pain, all that cold, all those months lost in ice, he still wanted to go back. Not for glory, not for fame, but because some souls are made for the wild. Some hearts are born to walk where no road exists. His dream didn't die in the snow, it burned brighter. Even his death, in the place he loved most, was part of that story. Today, when people visit South Georgia Island, they stand before his grave in silence. Some cry, some take photos, some just stare at the sea and feel the weight of history. That island is not just where Shackleton rests. It's where courage lives. And now, more than 100 years later, this story still teaches us something important. That real success is not in reaching the goal. Real success is in refusing to stop when the world tells you to quit. Shackleton's story is not about crossing Antarctica. It's about crossing the line between fear and bravery, between hopelessness and hope. This story, friends, is your story too. If you choose to never give up, no matter how cold the world becomes. Chapter 10. The story of Shackleton and his men was more than a survival tale. It was a mirror, showing us what is possible when human beings refuse to quit. But now, with the men rescued, the ship lost, and the storm behind them, people asked a different question. What did they gain? What did they carry with them after losing so much? They didn't return with fame. Most of them didn't even get paid properly. The world was deep in war. People were dying in Europe. Newspapers quickly moved from Shackleton's rescue to the next battle report. His return was celebrated for a short time, then forgotten by many. But not by those who mattered. Not by the 27 men whose lives were saved. Each man had changed, not just in body, but in soul. They had lived through something most people never would. They had stared into the cold face of death, not once, but for hundreds of days, and lived. That kind of experience doesn't fade. It becomes a part of you. Some men returned to their families and told stories. Others stayed silent, carrying the memory quietly, like a scar under the skin. But none of them forgot. Not one. Frank Wilde, the second in command, later wrote in his diary, "Each man was tested, and each proved himself." He had kept the men alive when Shackleton was gone. He had been the voice in the dark that said, "Hold on, just one more day." And for that, he became a hero in his own right. But Wilde never took credit. Like Shackleton, he simply said, "We did what we had to do." Many of the men later said that it was not the food, or the boat, or even the weather that was the hardest part. It was the waiting on the ice, the waiting for help, the waiting without knowing. Days passed so slowly, yet time moved like a blur. And in that quiet, something inside them either broke or grew stronger. Shackleton knew this. That's why he made sure they always had something to do. Even if it was simple, cleaning the camp, hunting for food, repairing tools, it gave them purpose. And purpose, friends, is what keeps people alive. Not just in Antarctica, but everywhere. You see, this story is not just about history. It's about us. Today, you may not be stuck in ice, but maybe you're stuck in life. Maybe you feel lost, cold, or alone. Maybe your dream feels far away, and you're tired of rowing. But remember this, Shackleton didn't give up when his ship sank. He didn't give up when food ran out. He didn't give up when storms almost killed him. So why should you? There is a line Shackleton once wrote in his journal. Difficulties are just things to overcome, after all. Read that again. Difficulties are just things. Not monsters. Not walls. Just things to overcome. Step by step. Day by day. That's how they survived. That's how they won. When endurance sank, it felt like the end. But it became the beginning of a story even greater than the goal. Shackleton never walked across Antarctica, but he walked through fear. He walked through failure. And in doing so, he became a true example of leadership that lasts beyond time. Years later, when people asked military generals and business leaders who they admired most, many of them said, Shackleton. Why? Because he proved that leadership isn't about orders. It's about care. It's about protecting others when the world turns dark. And that's something everyone needs to learn. Even today, in classrooms and leadership courses, Shackleton's name is spoken with deep respect. His photos, taken by Frank Hurley, are shown on big screens. The ship trapped in ice. The men smiling in the cold. The small lifeboat crossing giant waves. These images are not just pictures. They are lessons, reminders, warnings, and inspiration. When the Endurance was found in 2022, the world paused for a moment. People looked at that ship, deep under the sea, still untouched, and they remembered. They remembered what it meant to try, to risk, to lead, to endure. And that word, endurance, is more than a name. It is the message, the heart of this story. Because in the end, it wasn't ice that made them strong. It wasn't food that saved them. It was endurance. The power to keep going, even when every reason tells you to stop. So if you are watching this video now, and you're going through something hard, remember this story. Remember Shackleton. Remember the men who waited on ice, believing that their leader would return. And he did, against all odds. Because sometimes, all you need is one voice saying, "Don't worry. We'll make it." And sometimes, that voice has to be your own. Chapter 11. After the rescue, many people asked, how did they do it? How did Shackleton and his men stay alive for nearly 2 years in the most dangerous place on Earth? And one answer always came forward: teamwork. In every moment of pain, in every second of fear, they were never alone. They stayed together. That is how they survived. And that is how they came home. Let's go back to those days on the drifting ice. Imagine being there. You wake up in the dark. You don't know what day it is. You're sleeping on cold ice. Your clothes are always wet. Your boots are frozen. You don't know if you'll eat today or not. The wind screams all around you. It's like living inside a storm. Every day feels the same: cold, slow, and painful. Most people would lose their mind. Most people would give up. But these men did not. Why? Because they had each other. Shackleton made sure no man was left behind. No one was ignored. If someone was feeling weak, another man helped him walk. If someone felt hopeless, someone else gave him courage. And Shackleton was always watching. He didn't let anyone sink into sadness. He told jokes. He asked questions. He gave tasks. He reminded them, "We are in this together, and we will get out together." This was not easy. There were arguments. There was hunger. There was frustration. But Shackleton managed it all. He never yelled. He never blamed. When someone was angry, he listened. When someone cried, he comforted. When someone fell, he helped them stand. That's the kind of leader he was. A man who made others stronger just by standing near them. And what about the hard days? The worst days? When the ship sank, and the ice cracked, and food was running out. What did they do then? They still talked. They still cooked. They still told stories. They played cards. They sang songs. Yes, even in the freezing dark, they sang. Because they knew that the body needs food, but the soul needs laughter. One of the most powerful moments happened when Shackleton saw that some men were keeping extra food in secret. He understood. They were scared, but he also knew this could destroy the group. So he didn't punish them. He spoke gently. He explained, "We live or die together. No one will hide food, and no one will go hungry alone." That simple message changed everything. From that moment, they shared everything equally, even the smallest biscuit. Even more incredible was how they handled failure. Remember, Shackleton's original plan had completely failed. He didn't reach the South Pole. He didn't cross Antarctica. He lost his ship. He had no map for what came next. But still, he never let that failure break his spirit. He made a new plan, then another, then another. Because sometimes, real strength is not in doing what you planned. It's in adapting when your plan falls apart. He turned their biggest disaster into a survival mission. And his new goal was clear: save every man. Not most of them, not just the strongest, all of them. That became his personal promise. And when a leader makes that kind of promise, people follow. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Even in the small lifeboat, crossing that deadly sea, teamwork kept them alive. Imagine 6 men in a small boat for 16 days. No space, no warmth, storms crashing, waves rising, the sea trying to swallow them. Yet, they took turns rowing. They took turns keeping watch. When someone was tired, the others picked up the slack. When one man cried, the others gave him strength. That's how they reached South Georgia Island. And when they crossed the mountains with no map, tied together with rope, taking one dangerous step after another, that was teamwork too. Shackleton didn't walk in front. He walked beside. He kept the rope tight. He looked into their eyes and said, "We'll find a way." And they believed him, because he had already led them through worse. Many people think survival is about being strong. But Shackleton proved something else. Survival is about being united. When you feel alone, you fall. But when someone stands beside you and says, "We'll face this together," suddenly, you rise. Even in the coldest places on Earth. That's the biggest lesson of this story. That togetherness can melt even the coldest fear. That no one survives alone. And that the strongest people are not those who shout, but those who care. Shackleton didn't just keep his men alive. He kept their hearts alive. And in doing so, he became more than a leader. He became a symbol of human spirit. So wherever you are in life right now, remember this. When the storm comes, don't fight it alone. Stand with someone. Talk. Share. Support. And lead with kindness. Because as this story shows, kindness can save lives. Even when the ice is cracking beneath your feet. Chapter 12. After the rescue, when all 28 men stepped on a safe ground again, the world asked one big question. What was the secret? How did they survive 497 days in the most dangerous place on Earth? No maps, no technology, no help. Yet every man returned alive. And one of the most surprising answers came from the simplest thing: speaking, talking to each other, telling stories, using their voices. Because in this silent, deadly cold, their words became their warmth. You see, on the ice, time was a strange thing. Some days felt endless. The sun didn't rise. The wind never stopped. The cold was always there. There were no clocks, no phones, no busy streets. Just endless white. Men started forgetting what day it was. They forgot what month it was. Some forgot their birthdays. That's how deep the loneliness was. But then, one man would speak. Another would answer. A small laugh. A shared memory. And suddenly, they weren't alone anymore. Shackleton knew this. He understood something very important. That speaking was not just about communication. It was about survival. That's why he encouraged it. Every evening, he asked the men to talk. About their homes, their favorite food, their childhood, their hopes, even their fears. No one was forced to speak. But slowly, everyone did. Even the shy ones. Even the broken ones. And when they spoke, they healed. One of the most special things they did was storytelling. Frank Worsley, the captain, would tell sea stories from past voyages. Tom Crean would sing songs from Ireland. Frank Wilde would read aloud from old books they had saved from the ship. Sometimes, they even acted out plays or made silly jokes. And for a few moments, just a few precious minutes, the cold didn't feel so strong. The ice didn't feel so heavy. Because their voices filled the air with life. When they were on the lifeboats, things were worse. Water everywhere. Freezing winds. No space. No rest. Most men lay silently, curled in pain. But Shackleton didn't let the silence last too long. He would start talking. "What's the first thing you'll eat when we get back?" he'd ask with a smile. Someone would answer, "A hot steak." Another would say, "Chocolate cake." They would laugh, even though they hadn't eaten properly in days. And that laugh, that was power. That was fuel. That was life. It sounds so small, so simple, but that habit of speaking, that tiny spark of conversation, it kept their minds alive. It reminded them who they were. Not just lost men in Antarctica, but fathers, sons, friends, sailors, dreamers, survivors. Even during the most dangerous moment, when Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean were climbing the mountains of South Georgia with no map, no path, and no food, they still talked. When one man fell, the others asked, "Are you okay?" When they faced a cliff, they discussed which way to go. When they got tired, they reminded each other, "We're close now. We can't stop." Their voices gave strength to tired legs. Their words built bridges over fear. And in the end, when they reached the whaling station, the first thing Shackleton did was ask, "Can we go back for the others?" Not "Can I rest?" Not "Can I eat?" But "Can I go save my men?" And when he returned to Elephant Island, the first words he spoke were, "Are you all well?" Those were not just words. Those were promises. Kept. Even months later, after the war ended, many of the men said it was those daily conversations, those small talks about food, family, the future, that kept them alive more than anything else. More than meat, more than boots, even more than fire. Because when everything outside you is frozen, you must keep something warm inside. And speech, friends, is that fire inside the heart. This is a lesson for all of us. Maybe you are not lost in Antarctica, but maybe you feel lost in life. Maybe you're surrounded by stress, by silence, by sadness, and maybe, like those men, you feel stuck in the cold. Then do what they did, speak. Talk to someone. Talk to yourself. Speak about your dreams, your pain, your hopes. Speak your survival. Because sometimes a small sentence can be a lifeline. A short chat can become a warm campfire. And even in the coldest storms, one voice can keep another soul alive. Chapter 13. After the long journey home, Shackleton's crew spread across the world. Some went back to families. Some joined the war. Some never spoke much again about what happened on the ice. But in quiet moments, when they sat alone or looked at the stars, they remembered it all. The endless white, the ice cracking under their boots, the soft voice of a teammate saying, "We'll be okay," and the strong, steady presence of Shackleton, walking ahead, even when the road had disappeared. Shackleton's name became a symbol, not just of adventure, but of unbreakable will. Yet, the world around him was changing. War had changed Europe. New machines were being built. New technology was growing. But Shackleton didn't want to stay still. He was not made for normal life. He belonged to open waters and unknown lands. So, in 1921, he planned to return to the South once more. Some people called him mad. Why go back? Why return to the place that almost killed you? But Shackleton smiled and said, "The call of the wild never leaves you." His heart beat for the silence of snow, the sound of wind over frozen seas. He didn't want luxury. He wanted meaning. And in the deep south, he found it. He bought a small ship and called it Quest. He gathered a new crew, some of them old friends from the Endurance days. The plan was to explore the Antarctic coast and nearby islands. But before reaching Antarctica, the ship stopped at South Georgia Island, the same place where Shackleton had once found rescue and hope. That night, he felt pain in his chest. He was only 47, but his body was tired. It had carried too much for too long. On the morning of January 5, 1922, before the sun rose, Shackleton died in his cabin. Quietly, suddenly, as if his heart had whispered, "This is enough." The doctor could do nothing. The crew was shocked. Their leader, the man who had walked through fire and ice, was gone. When the ship sent the news home, Shackleton's wife gave a simple answer. She said, "He belongs to the South." So they buried him there, on South Georgia Island, near the cold winds and icy seas. His grave faces the ocean. A stone cross stands behind it. No grand statue, no crown, just a simple message. Ernest Shackleton, explorer. But for the people who knew his story, that word meant more than any title. After his death, many books were written. His journals were published. The photos taken by Frank Hurley showed the world what real survival looked like. The image of endurance crushed in ice. The men standing with snow in their beards, smiling through pain. The little boats crossing wild seas. These pictures didn't just tell a story, they made people feel it. And then, 100 years later, the sea gave one last gift. In 2022, a team of researchers and explorers found Endurance, the same ship that had disappeared beneath the ice in 1915. It was sitting deep under the Weddell Sea, 10,000 feet below the surface. But the ship wasn't broken. It wasn't lost. It was still there, frozen in time, like a sleeping giant. The name Endurance could still be read clearly on the wood. The ropes, the mast, the deck, all perfectly preserved. When the world saw the pictures, hearts stopped. It was like touching history. It was like Shackleton had left one last message. "I'm still here. My story is not over." And truly it wasn't. Because his story is not just about reaching Antarctica. It's about reaching the heart. It's about showing what a human being can do when nothing is left but hope. The ship, the ice, the ocean, they all tried to stop him. But he walked through it all. He walked with belief. And he returned with every man alive. That, friends, is not just survival. That is leadership. That is greatness. And even now, when someone says, "I don't think I can go on," this story answers, yes, you can. Just take the next step. Just hold on one more day. Because that's what Shackleton did. And that's what his men did. And that's what we all can do, even in our hardest moments. Chapter 14. When the world looked at Shackleton's expedition, they saw a failure. He never crossed Antarctica. He never completed the journey he had planned. The ship was destroyed. The mission was lost. But what people didn't understand at first was that this failure had become one of the greatest success stories in human history. Why? Because every single man came home alive. In a place where death was everywhere, Shackleton brought back life. And this success didn't come from luck. It came from something much deeper, leadership. Shackleton led not with orders, but with example. When the food was low, he ate last. When the wind was cold, he gave his blanket to someone else. When someone was silent and sad, Shackleton noticed. He sat next to him, spoke to him, gave him hope. That was his real gift. Not just navigating ice and water, but navigating human hearts. There's a famous story. One night, on the ice, a man was shaking with cold. He had no energy to continue. Shackleton took off one of his own gloves and gave it to him. "You need it more than I do," he said. The man survived, but Shackleton got frostbite in that hand. He never complained. He never spoke about it later. That was the kind of leader he was. Quiet, strong, sacrificing. And his leadership had rules, not written ones, but felt in every decision. Rule 1. Stay together. No man was ever left alone. When one person went to collect snow for water, another followed. When someone went to the toilet, a friend waited nearby. Not because it was safe, but because it was human. They were more than a crew. They were a family. Rule 2. Hope is your weapon. Every morning, Shackleton smiled. Even when he was scared. Even when he didn't know the way forward. He smiled to give courage to his men. And they smiled back because they trusted him. In the darkest times, that hope was like a light. Small, but powerful. And that light never went out. Rule 3. Adapt. Be flexible. Change the plan if needed. Shackleton wanted to cross Antarctica. That dream died. So he built a new dream to keep every man alive. And when the ship was lost, he didn't cry. He acted. When the ice moved, he moved. When the sea rose, he rose. He didn't fight the storm, he worked with it, like a river flowing around rocks. That's why he survived. And there was another secret. Shackleton gave every man a job. He didn't let anyone feel useless. One man cooked. One cleaned. One played music. One told jokes. Even the photographer had a mission to save the memory. When a person feels needed, they feel stronger. They feel human. And in that frozen world, feeling human was everything. The men said later, Shackleton never promised comfort, but he gave us confidence. He never said, "We'll be fine," but he said, "We'll do our best together." And that made all the difference. Even the smallest choices were important. One day, the men were low on food. They had a little bit of chocolate, only a small piece for each man. Shackleton had some extra. He gave his share to the weakest man, not as a gift, but as a message, "I believe in you." That man stood up straighter after that, and walked further than he thought possible. This is the lesson. A leader doesn't need power. A leader needs heart. Shackleton was not perfect. He made mistakes. He misjudged the ice. He took risks. But when things went wrong, he stayed. He didn't run. He didn't blame. He carried the weight of every life with him, and he never dropped it. In a world full of noise and big promises, Shackleton's leadership was quiet, but real. And that's why we remember him. Not because of where he went, but because of what he gave. Strength, safety, and the will to go on, even when there was no path. Chapter 15. The story of Shackleton is more than cold winds and broken ships. It is a story of how the human spirit can shine even in darkness. But the world didn't fully understand this story until the photographs were shown. Frank Hurley, the brave photographer of the Endurance, had risked his life to carry the glass negatives of his photos. And those frozen memories changed everything. People saw the ship trapped in ice like a toy in a frozen sea. They saw the men standing tall, with snow in their beards and tired but strong eyes. They saw laughter in hard moments, teamwork in bitter storms, and silence in places where no words were enough. These pictures told the world. This was not just survival. It was a masterpiece of determination. When the photographs were finally shown in London, the crowd was silent. These were not actors. These were real men, facing a deadly continent and still standing proud. Some cried. Some felt brave. Some felt small. Shackleton, once seen as a failed explorer, was now being called a hero, a role model, a symbol of hope in times of crisis. Even newspapers, who had earlier doubted his journey, now said, Shackleton brought every man back alive. That's success. Soon, the name Endurance became known not just in Britain, but around the world. People in America, Australia, and Europe read the story of the man who didn't give up. Schools taught children about Shackleton. Companies studied his leadership style. Even soldiers in World War I read his book for courage during battle. His life became a lesson. When things fall apart, your attitude decides everything. But for Shackleton's men, the memories stayed fresh, not just of the adventure, but of each small moment that helped them stay human. They remembered singing songs at night in the cold. They remembered how Shackleton made them shave, even on the ice, to feel normal. They remembered his jokes, his stories, his way of walking ahead, even when he had no map, just trust. Many years later, people would say, that's the Shackleton way. What does it mean? It means putting people first. It means never giving up. It means facing fear with calm. And it means caring, really caring, about the people around you. Shackleton never lost a single crew member. But more than that, he never lost their respect. Every man who followed him said the same thing. I would go with him again. Anywhere, even to hell. One of the most powerful examples of this came from a man named Tom Crean. Crean was part of the team that crossed the wild mountains of South Georgia with Shackleton to reach help. At one point, the climb was too much. The ice was steep. The wind was screaming. But Shackleton whispered, one step at a time. Just one more step. And they did. They kept going, crawling, climbing, until they saw the lights of the whaling station. They had made it. And they had done it by believing in each other. It's easy to look back now and think, that was history. But the truth is, that kind of courage is still needed today. Maybe not on ice. Maybe not with snow. But in daily life. In our jobs. In our problems. In our fears. When we feel stuck. When we feel cold inside. When we don't see the way forward. Shackleton's story reminds us, don't give up. Take the next small step. And help the person beside you. So many stories are loud, full of shouting, drama, and fake victory. But this one is quiet. And that's why it stays in the heart. A group of men lost in a frozen world, who found something even stronger than escape. They found purpose. They found each other. They found that even if everything is taken away, if you keep walking, if you keep believing, you are not lost. And that, my friends, is why Shackleton's story will never melt away. Chapter 16. After everything they had survived, the frozen sea, the broken ship, the hunger, the dark nights, and the endless days on drifting ice, the journey still wasn't over. Shackleton had reached the whaling station in South Georgia, but now came the hardest part, saving the rest of his men. 22 of them were still waiting on Elephant Island, cold, tired, and slowly losing hope. Shackleton had promised he would return for them. And when Shackleton made a promise, it was like a rock, unbreakable. But the sea was cruel. The ice was thick. The weather was wild. Shackleton tried once to sail back, locked by ice. He tried again. The engine broke. A third time, the The storm threw them off course. But did he give up? No. With every failure, he stood up straighter. He didn't sleep much. He didn't rest. His mind was full of one thought. My men are waiting. I have to go back. Finally, on his fourth attempt, he got a strong little ship called the Yelcho. It belonged to the Chilean Navy. It wasn't big. It wasn't strong. But it had something powerful, hope. Shackleton boarded it with his small rescue crew and looked out at the sea one more time. Icebergs floated like silent mountains. The wind screamed. The journey was not easy. But this time, it felt different. This time, the ice began to move. The sea began to open, and the Yelcho kept sailing forward. On August 30th, 1916, after more than 4 months of waiting, the men on Elephant Island saw a shape on the horizon. A ship, a flag, a miracle. At first, they didn't believe their eyes. Was it real? Was it Shackleton? They ran to the edge of the island. They lit fires. They waved their arms. And soon they saw his face. It was him, Sir Ernest Shackleton, the man who never forgot them. Tears ran down their faces. Strong men, grown men, fell to their knees. They had survived on hope, and hope had returned. Shackleton climbed down from the Yelcho and shouted the only question that mattered. "Are you all well?" And one of the men shouted back, "All safe, all well, boss." Shackleton closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Not one man was lost. Not a single life. He had done it. The rescue was quick. There was no time to waste. Ice could trap the ship again. In under an hour, all 22 men were on board the Yelcho. Their long nightmare was finally over. For 497 days, more than a year and a half, these men had survived in one of the coldest, loneliest places on Earth. And now they were going home. As the ship moved away from Elephant Island, the men looked back one last time. That cold land had nearly taken their lives, but it had also taught them something deep about loyalty, courage, patience, and the power of staying together. Each man had become stronger, and every one of them knew they would never forget this journey. When they returned to South America, people lined the shores to see them. Newspapers called it the greatest rescue ever attempted. Shackleton became a legend, but he didn't smile much. When someone asked why, he said quietly, "They don't know what it was like." He wasn't thinking about fame. He was thinking about his men, about their suffering, about the things they had lost, and the strength they had found. Years later, many of these men said the same thing, that the experience changed them, that nothing in life ever felt impossible again, that when they faced pain, fear, or failure, they remembered Shackleton. They remembered the ice, and they remembered that they had made it through. This rescue showed the world something beautiful, that even in the darkest times, if someone believes in you, if someone doesn't give up on you, everything can change. Shackleton didn't just bring them home. He taught them how powerful a promise can be. He showed them that true leadership means being the last to sleep, the first to rise, and never letting go of your people, no matter the cost. And that's a lesson for all of us. In our own lives, we may not be on an icy island, but we all go through storms. We all feel stuck sometimes. And in those moments, we need someone like Shackleton, or we need to be like Shackleton, strong, steady, and full of heart. Chapter 17. When the men returned home, they were not the same people who had left on the Endurance. Their faces were thinner, their hands tougher, and their eyes full of stories. But the biggest change was inside them. Something had shifted. They had faced death many times, but they had never let it win. And now, everything in the world looked different to them. Simple things like warm food, a soft bed, or hearing birds sing felt like magic. Life, which they had once taken for granted, now felt like a precious gift. Shackleton, too, was different. He was famous now. People called him a hero. Journalists wrote his name in big, bold letters. Shackleton, the man who saved his entire crew. But he didn't walk like a hero. He didn't boast. He didn't chase praise. He walked quietly, still thinking of the cold ice, the men's tired faces, and the sound of the endurance breaking. He had done something impossible, not because he was perfect, but because he cared. He once said, "The only true failure is not trying." That was his secret. He kept trying. Always. Many people asked him, "What was your biggest strength?" Was it planning? Leadership? Bravery? Shackleton smiled and replied, "Optimism. That's my best quality." Even in the worst storms, when the ship was gone, when food was low, when the sea refused to open, he believed things would get better. And this belief, like a small fire in the snow, warmed the hearts of every man around him. His story began to be taught in schools. Leaders studied his choices. Teams copied his methods. In war, in business, in life, people asked, what would Shackleton do? And the answer was always the same. Stay calm, protect your people, and never give up. He became more than a man. He became a symbol of human strength. A reminder that even when everything is falling apart, you can still hold yourself together. But life doesn't stop after one great story. After the endurance, Shackleton wanted to return to Antarctica, not for fame, but because it called to him. The white silence, the wild winds, the place where he had faced his worst fears and found his strongest self. So in 1921, he planned another expedition. He wanted to explore more, to push the limits again. He was older now, slower, but the fire in him had never died. He got a ship, the Quest, and he prepared to leave one more time. Many of his old crew joined him again. They still trusted him. They still believed in his leadership. But as they reached South Georgia, the same island where it all began, Shackleton felt unwell. On the morning of January 5th, 1922, he had a heart attack. And just like that, the great explorer was gone. He died in the place he loved most, the gateway to Antarctica. His body was buried in South Georgia by the sea. And to this day, people visit his grave. Some bring flowers. Some bring books. Some just stand there silently, whispering, "Thank you." But even though he died, his story didn't. It lived on in every person who heard it. It lived in the photos Hurley had taken, in the journals of the crew, in the ice that once tried to kill them, but couldn't crush their spirit. Shackleton's journey became more than survival. It became a message for all time. When you are stuck, remember the endurance. When life feels cold, think of the men on the ice. When hope is small, remember Shackleton's eyes, looking at the sea, planning, dreaming, and believing. His life teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is walking forward even when you are afraid. And so, in our own lives, when we face our personal Antarctica, whether it's failure, fear, loneliness, or pain, we must ask ourselves, will we break or will we endure? Chapter 18. Years passed. The ice melted. The waves returned to calm. But the story of Shackleton and his crew never faded. People began to study it not just as history, but as a guide on how to lead, how to survive, how to stay human when the world around you turns cruel. Books were written, films were made. Explorers, astronauts, and adventurers said they had learned from Shackleton. Even in the modern world of technology and comfort, people were drawn to his simple truth. When everything is lost, character is what remains. The men who had survived with him went on to live powerful lives. Some returned to sea. Some stayed home and told the story to their children and grandchildren. But none of them forgot. They never forgot the sound of the ship breaking, the wind screaming across the ice, the way they had huddled together in the dark. They remembered the taste of seal meat, the freezing water in their boots, the endless white horizon, and the man who kept them going. They often said, "The boss saved us." Shackleton was not just a captain. He was their hope, their strength. He knew when to be tough and when to be gentle. He laughed with them in the worst times. He shared their food. He broke his own rules when it meant saving someone's spirit. His leadership was not just about orders, it was about care. That was what made him different. That was what made him unforgettable. And for us today, sitting in warm rooms, reading on screens, speaking to the world with one tap, Shackleton's story reminds us of something real, something raw. It reminds us that courage isn't loud. It's not always big. Sometimes it's quiet. It's waking up one more day when you feel like giving up. It's taking care of the people around you. It's facing storms, outside and inside, and saying, "I will not stop here." The Endurance was found again in 2022, deep beneath the icy sea. More than 100 years after it sank, it stood upright, almost untouched by time, as if it was waiting, as if it had a story to finish. Scientists cried when they saw it. They felt like they were seeing an old friend, a ghost from the past, but also a symbol of something strong, something that did not break, even under pressure. Today, in leadership books and motivational talks, people say, "Be like Shackleton." But what does that really mean? It means put your people first. It means never give up, even when the world says no. It means believe in something bigger than yourself. And it means knowing that success is not only about reaching the goal, it's about who you become along the way. His life was not perfect. He made mistakes. He failed at other expeditions. He lost money. He struggled with health. But in the moment when it mattered most, when 27 lives depended on him, he rose. He stood strong. And he brought them all home. That is the kind of story that does not fade. So when you feel tired, when your dream feels too far, when life feels too cold, remember Shackleton, not as a superhero, but as a man who walked through the snow, fell, stood up again, and kept walking. A man who looked after his people. A man who believed in himself, in his mission, and in the power of not giving up. And maybe, just maybe, that belief is what we need too. Chapter 19. What did Shackleton really teach us? Not just how to fight the cold, not just how to survive on little food. He taught us how to think when life goes wrong. He taught us how to lead when fear is loud. He taught us how to keep our hope when the world says, "It's over." This is the heart of the story. This is the lesson that lives beyond the ice. And today, I want you to feel it, not just understand it. Close your eyes for a second and imagine the sound of ice pushing, wood breaking, wind screaming. Imagine your breath turning white in the dark. Now open your eyes. The ship is gone. The plan is dead. What do? Most people freeze. Shackleton moved. He moved first in his mind. He accepted reality. He did not argue with the storm. He did not say, "But this was my dream." He looked at the truth and made a new mission: save every man. Friends, this is powerful. When life changes the plan, change your goal, not your spirit. Many people drown because they keep fighting for a perfect picture that no longer exists. Shackleton let the picture go. He kept the purpose. This is the first lesson: adapt fast. Say the words out loud if you need to. The plan has changed, but I have not given up. It sounds simple, but on the ice it saved lives. The second lesson is about small steps. At sea, the waves were too big. In the mountains, the slopes were too steep. On the floe, the days were too long. So he cut his world into small pieces. For hours rowing. For hours resting. One more mile across the ice. One more cliff. One more ridge. One more sunrise. He told his men, just the next thing. When you are lost, small steps are everything. You may not finish the journey today, but can you do the next 10 minutes? Can you make one call, write one page, learn one sentence, help one person? That is how giant journeys are walked, 10 minutes at a time. The third lesson is about energy. Not food energy, emotional energy. He protected it like treasure. He watched faces. He heard voices. He cut negativity the way he cut stairs in ice. If two men argued, he moved them to different tents. If someone was too quiet, he sat beside him. He made routines: shaving, cleaning, card games, reading, singing. Why? Because routine creates normal. Normal creates calm. Calm saves energy. And that energy becomes courage when the storm returns. Many leaders focus on tasks. Shackleton focused on spirits. He knew a warm heart can carry a cold body much farther than the other way around. The fourth lesson is about fairness. Food was divided equally. Even the last biscuit. No secret pockets. No special plates. Everyone worked. Everyone rested. Everyone mattered. This built trust, and trust made them strong. One man said later, "I would have followed him into the sea if he asked." Think about that. You cannot buy that kind of loyalty. You earn it by being fair when things are hard. When you share the little you have, people share their strength back. The fifth lesson is about courage with humility. Shackleton was brave, yes, but he was also careful. He did not take useless risks. He waited for weather. He watched the ice. He listened to his navigator. He changed his mind when better ideas appeared. Courage is not closing your eyes and jumping. Courage is opening your eyes wider and choosing the smartest risk. That is why the James Caird reached South Georgia. Not luck, not magic, smart courage. The sixth lesson is about words. He used simple words that carried weight. We'll go home. No one dies. Keep cheerful. Pack your bags. The boss may come today. These are short sentences, but they held the camp together like rope. Your words do the same. When you speak to a child, to a friend, to a team, or to yourself, keep your words clear, honest, and strong. Do not add fear to fear. Add light. Add direction. Add hope. The seventh lesson is about responsibility. When the ship was crushed, he did not blame the ice, the season, the charts, or fate. He looked at his men and took the weight. Leaders eat last. Leaders sleep last. Leaders worry in private and steady others in public. Did he feel fear? Yes. He was human. He shouted at a bird in the storm because the fear was heavy inside him. But after the shout, he went back to work. He fixed the sail. He checked the compass. He held the rope. Responsibility does not mean never shaking. It means shaking and still steering. The eighth lesson is about gratitude. When they reached Elephant Island, they fell on their knees and touched the ground. Land felt like a miracle. When a seal appeared, they called it a gift. When a small fire burned, it was joy. Gratitude keeps your mind from breaking. It teaches you to see what is still here, not only what is gone. Even now, when you drink clean water or step into a warm room, whisper, "Thank you." Gratitude is not soft. It is armor. And there is one more lesson, maybe the biggest. Shackleton did not become a legend because he reached his original goal. He became a legend because he protected human life above the goal. That choice is the line between ambition and greatness. Goals are important, but people are sacred. When you must choose, choose people. Save the team. Save the friendship. Save your own health. The world will call that failure. History will call it wisdom. So what did Shackleton really teach us? He taught us to bend without breaking, to lead with heart, to plan like a scientist and care like a brother, to use humor as medicine, to make the next small step, to speak hope when hope is thin, and above all, to measure success not by flags in the snow, but by the souls you bring home. One day, you will face your own ice, your own silent night. When that day comes, remember this story. Lift your head, warm your words, choose the next small step, and tell yourself, like Shackleton told his men, we will go home. Because sometimes those 4 words are the rope that pulls you through the dark. Chapter 20. The journey was over, but the story had just begun. When Shackleton stepped back onto South Georgia Island, his beard white with ice, his eyes sharp with months of watching storms. There were no reporters, no cameras, no celebration. Just a man who had done the impossible. He had brought all 27 of his men back alive from the most unforgiving place on earth. Not one lost. Not one forgotten. The world didn't know yet what he had done. But he knew. His men knew. And that was enough. The sea had taken his ship. The ice had taken his dream. But nothing had taken his will. The moment he reached the whaling station and saw the face of a man who hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, the words came out quietly. "We've lost the ship." The man who answered him cried. Not because of the ship, but because of the man standing in front of him, alive. Dirty, worn, but alive. He didn't rest long. He went back for his men on Elephant Island. The first few rescue attempts failed, blocked by ice, just like before. But he didn't stop. He didn't sleep. He searched for ships. He begged for help. He tried again and again. And on the 4th try, months after leaving them behind, he returned. The moment the men saw the tiny boat on the horizon, they screamed with joy. Shackleton jumped ashore and called out, "Are you all well?" And the reply came fast and strong. All safe, all well. He had done it. Every man. Alive. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a promise kept. It was proof that leadership is not about power, it's about loyalty. It's about never leaving your people behind. The world was amazed. The newspapers called it a miracle. Scientists called it luck. Leaders called it genius. But Shackleton? He just said, "The only true failure would have been if I had not tried." That is the kind of man he was. He didn't want fame. He wanted to serve. He wanted to lead with heart. After the war, Shackleton planned another Antarctic journey. He couldn't stay away from the ice. It called him, the way adventure calls the brave. But in 1922, as he prepared for this new trip, he died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 47 years old. He died near the place he loved most, South Georgia Island. His body was buried there, in the cold soil of a land that had tested him, shaped him, and witnessed his greatest strength. Today, people still visit his grave. They leave notes. They cry. They thank him. Because Shackleton's story is not just history. It is a map for every hard road. A whisper in the ear of anyone who feels lost. A reminder that courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward in spite of it. When your dreams fall apart, remember Shackleton. When your plans get stuck in the ice, remember the man who adapted. When you feel alone, remember 28 men standing together on a frozen sea, choosing faith over fear. When life offers you nothing but wind, snow, and silence, walk on. You don't need perfect weather. You don't need perfect plans. You need heart. You need hope. And above all, you need the will to keep going. Because survival is not just staying alive. Survival is keeping your spirit alive. Even when the ship sinks. Even when the world is ice. Even when the night is long. You keep going. Like Shackleton did. Like you can. Like you must. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something powerful inside, courage, hope, determination, then don't keep it to yourself. Share the story. Speak about it. And start your own journey with that same spirit. If you love this video, please like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel Bookish English 2 for more powerful stories, lessons, and real journeys told in simple English, so you can learn, feel, and grow every day. Don't forget to visit us regularly, because your journey is just beginning. And as Shackleton proved, no dream is ever lost, as long as you don't lose yourself.